So essentially, it's set Japanese archipelagos a few years in the future. Mayor Kobayashi has decided that all dogs must be banished to Trash Island, which is an island entirely, made up of mounds of trash and deserted fairgrounds and, what have you. And this is where all the dogs have been put under the premise that there is an outbreak of canine flu and snout fever that is threatening to cross the species barrier. The first dog to go is the dog that's actually from the mayor's household. The mayor's ward is so bereft, so heartbroken that he's lost his dog that he takes a little plane and he flies out to the island. He then arrives on the island. Sorry, I'm doing the setup that otherwise your Brian would have done. And he then meets a pack of dogs. All they describe themselves as indestructible, scary alpha dogs, whose war cry seems to be, let's take a vote. Except for Bryan Cranston's dog, who is a stray, a tramp. And they then help the boy on his quest to find his lost dog and to venture to the far reaches of Trash Island and to see what goes on there, because there are stories of the indigenous dog population escapees from, experimental labs. So when you say, for example, it's not cute, there is a scene very, very early on in which a dog gets its ear bitten off and spat out. There is a scene very early on in which our young human hero gets a propeller bolt stuck in the side of his head, which stays there for quite some time. There is a scene early on when somebody's told to stop, when a dog is told to stop licking their wounds, and it's meant literally, not metaphorically. There is a sushi sequence which squirm-inducingly live, and there is also organ transplants. So cute doesn't cover the full extent of it. That said, it does have a sort of soft and tender heart. One of the things I liked most about it is that there are regular scraps, because these are very sort of scrappy dogs. And the animation itself is kind of scrappy and scratchy and itchy. I was reading something about the way in which they did the animation, talking about doing every other frame rather than every frame in order to give it a slightly jittery quality. And that wasn't something I'd known about before I watched it, but then thinking back on it, it did make perfect sense, and it had given it that slightly, the lovely tactility of stop motion anyway, which you get here because you get the cotton wool clouds and the cellophane rivers. On the one hand, there's a beautiful simplicity to it, but on the other hand, there's this just wealth of detail that as you're watching it, you think, I'm sorry, I have to get this on Blu-ray or DVD because I'm half the stuff that's happening I'm not seeing as it's happening beyond me. But when the dogs fight, the fights turn into this kind of like a still from the Beano cartoon, a cloud of dust with limbs sticking out randomly from it. So it has a sort of soft slapstick heart, but it also has a scalpel-like precision. When it wants to be slightly biting and slightly slicey, then it does do so. Plus, there are references in it to things like the plague dogs. It is not something which is just completely soft-hearted. The interesting thing was when Bryan Cranston was talking about that, he said, well, it's an allegory. It's basically an allegory about disenfranchisement. And you can read it like that. You can read it as a story about these characters, because the dogs all speak English. One of the things that's been raised about is the dogs speak English, but the human characters mainly speak Japanese, and the Japanese is untranslated other than when it's through a translator or through an exchange student or at one point through an electronic device. And the idea was in order to make to foreground the canine conversation. And some people have said, well, by not subtitling the Japanese dialogue, what you've done for an Anglophone audience is basically to make the Japanese characters others as opposed to make the humans others. And I don't agree with that, because Wes Anderson was talking about it and saying, you may not understand the words, but you do understand what's being said. You understand the emotion of what's being said. You kind of generally get the gist of it. And you do. I was quite surprised, particularly as well, since Japanese is not inflected in the way that English is, but actually there is a musicality to the way in which those things were. So I found myself fully understanding what was going on anyway. But the dogs all speak English. They all speak like Wes Anderson characters. They all speak like the kind of characters you get, in Royal Tenenbaums or whatever. And so consequently, you can read them as people. You can say it's about disenfranchised people. It's about people being pushed to the sides of society, about people being literally dumped in a trash can. Or you can read it about a story about cruelty to animals. And there's this whole thing going on about this. Bryan Cranston was talking about the xenophobia of cats. That now the major city is actually, it's friendly to cats, but the dogs have been driven out. So you can see that if you want. Or you can read it as a story about dogs. And one of the reasons that it works, funnily enough, is that the observations of canine behaviour are actually very well done. Now, I was not a fan of Fantastic Mr. Fox. I found Fantastic Mr. Fox kind of, for me, felt like a sort of smug adult joke. And in fact, I think that when I was reviewing it, I said it was like a bunch of adults had turned up at a kid's party and had sort of taken it over. And that troubled me. In the case of this, it did work. Firstly, because I think it's visually ravishing and beautiful. I mean, amidst the trash heaps, amidst all the junk-topia going on, there is real beauty. There's a lovely sequence in which they're in a shelter and the light is being filtered through these empty bottles and old sake cans, but it's glowing and it glows, really tenderly. I love the fur on the dogs. I love the way that it rustles, because as the animators are moving them, they're moving them with their hands, and this kind of creates the illusion of the wind blowing through them. I love how scratchy they are. I love how much they look like they are, on the one hand, they're just sort of thin, and at the beginning we get this description of what snout fever and the canine flu has done to them. It's made them insomniac and all the rest of it, but they're really tactile and you really believe them. And on the other hand, it's the incredible journey. And on the other hand, it's a story of a boy and his dog. It's a story of a young boy looking for his dog. And when I've seen it just the once, and the first time of seeing it, I thought, firstly, I have to see this again because there's so much going on in it. The score is really well done, which is mixing these taiko drums with, instruments that you wouldn't expect. And there are other levels of allegory going on that Bryan Cranston was talking about. But when I watched it the first time, I just thought, I really like these characters. I really love the tactility of the animation. I love the camera work. I love the fact that there is the symmetry of the frame, which you expect from Anderson and, Tristan Oliver. And then there is the scrappiness of the characters, which I really, really enjoyed. And I thought it was terrific. I'm feeling very positive.
Old sake cans would be a good nickname for you, actually. I've just mentioned
old sake cans.
Old sake cans you mentioned.
I'll take that.
And in the longer version of the interview, yes. I think it's about authoritarianism and immigration, actually.
Yes, well,
not about dogs.
No. As I said, I think you can absolutely read it like that. But one of the things that I think makes it work is that you can read it in a number of different ways. And the tales that have the greatest universality are tales in which, you can see it as a boy and his dog, or you can see it as a political thing, or you can see it as a film that's actually about, human estrangement, or you can see it as a film about set 20 years in the future with a bunch of dogs on Trash Island, with a boy with a bolt stuck in his head.